Welcome to History Counts. History provides the roadmap to the future. If you want to know where you're going, you have to understand where you've been. I'm your host, Ken MacDermotRoe. The life of civil rights leader and peace advocate Martin Luther King was ended at the age of 39 by an assassin's bullet. Months after the murder, the authorities proclaimed that the crime had been solved. The murderer, they said, was a lone gunman with unclear motives who acted on his own behalf and no one else's. It was a familiar story, but is it true? Today on History Counts, we take a look at the assassination of Martin Luther King. Who really killed Dr. King and why? Stay tuned to History Counts. Welcome to History Counts. I'm your host, Ken MacDermotRoe. Our subject today is the assassination of Martin Luther King, and our guest is author and international lawyer William Pepper. Mr. Pepper, who is both a British barrister and an American lawyer, investigated the murder of Dr. King for over a quarter century. For several years, he represented Dr. King's supposed assassin, James Ray, and Ray's legal efforts to obtain a trial. Mr. Pepper later represented the family of Dr. King in a civil wrongful death action against those believed to be responsible for Dr. King's murder. Mr. Pepper is the author of An Active State, The Execution of Martin Luther King. Thanks very much for being with us, Mr. Pepper.
Oh, you're welcome.
Can you tell us when and where Martin Luther King was murdered?
Martin Luther King was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee on the 4th of April, 1968 at approximately 1 minute past 6.
And why was he in Memphis, Tennessee?
He was in Memphis, Tennessee, and to organize a march on behalf of the striking garbage workers. They had been on strike for a period of months, and it had polarized the Memphis community. Dr. King led a march on the 28th of March, which broke up into turbulence and violence, and he had to be rushed from the scene. Later, we learned that march was broken up by provocateurs who came from outside of Memphis, particularly from Chicago and St. Louis.
Now, while many Americans think of Martin Luther King principally as a civil rights leader, in the year before his death, he started to move into other areas. Can you talk about that?
Well, I only knew Martin King the last year of his life, and I came to know him when I came back from Vietnam. I'd been a journalist in Vietnam, and when I came back, I wrote one piece in particular that caught his attention. It had to do with for Ramparts magazine, and it had to do with the effect of the war on the civilian population of Vietnam, most of whom were either under 15 years of age or elderly, and they were, of course, being slaughtered. And that struck, some of my photographs struck him, and so he asked to meet with me, and I worked with him then the last year of his life, and began pretty conclusively to turn him and see him turn into more than a civil rights leader. And that had been the direction he'd been heading in anyway, but he now became a committed human rights advocate and an anti-war campaigner.
He made a famous speech at Riverside Church just a year before the assassination.
Yeah, 1 year to the day, 4th of April.
In which he declared his opposition to the war. He was also involved in a Poor People's Campaign that was going to have a demonstration in Washington that summer.
Yes, he was leaving Memphis, actually, to head into Mississippi and begin the mobilization of marchers into Washington, not for the purpose of holding a demonstration and marching, but for the purpose of living in an encampment inside Washington, the shadow of the Washington Memorial. So he was going to bring many, many thousands of people there for the purpose of taking up residence in the nation's capital and going up and visiting their Congress people on a daily basis in an effort to try to press them to put back into the budget funds that had been taken out and were needed for social programs, but had been denied because of the war.
And there was also some talk that he might run for president in '68?
Yes, there was a very distinct movement, and that's really what became a major part of my activity. He asked me to head up a National Conference for New Politics, which was an umbrella organization of all the anti-war and peace activist movements throughout the country, including many sort of disenchanted Democrats, members of the Democratic Party, who wanted to see this war end, and the idea was to form a ticket of Martin King and Dr. Benjamin Spock as a third party alternative and on an anti-war platform.
You note that in 1979, the House Select Committee on Assassinations found that the FBI had targeted Martin Luther King since the early '60s. Why was the FBI after Dr. King?
Well, I mean, Hoover took a strong personal dislike to Dr. King, and of course, Hoover was looking for every opportunity he could to tie the civil rights movement and Martin King to communist influence in the Communist Party. This, of course, it was an effort to divert, and successfully did for many years, divert attention away from Hoover's alliance with organized crime and his working relationship effectively with organized crime in the United States by being able to deny its existence, which he did for many years. And he targeted King and other civil rights leaders.
These activities included things like burglaries and wiretaps and infiltration of the staff.
The whole operation, the whole Pro operation.
You mentioned that they even had an informant in his executive staff.
Yes, they had an informant who was handled by an agent out of the Atlanta field office, and would.
Now, subsequent to the shooting of Dr. King on April 4th, who was arrested for the murder?
Well, James Earl Ray was arrested at Heathrow Airport in London and charged with the assassination. He had been well and duly set up, although none of us realized it at the time, and indeed I didn't realize it for 9 years. It took me 9 years. 9 years later, when Abernathy asked me to go interrogate Ray, that we began to really look at the serious possibility that the man was innocent.
How did he supposedly do the crime? Where was he shooting from?
Well, supposedly he committed the crime from a bathroom window, a rooming house that backed onto Mulberry Street and the Lorraine Motel, and supposedly, allegedly, he had rented a room and he just waited for Dr. King to appear, and then he shot him and fled down the stairway and out the front door, where he went a few feet south on Main Street, dropped the bundle in the doorway of an amusement parlor and record shop, and then got into a Mustang, drove away. Now that was the story that of the actual killing that the government put forward.
And he did plead guilty subsequently.
He was coerced by his second lawyer, Percy Foreman, who had promised him a trial, but at the end of the last minute, coerced him into pleading, into copping a plea, saying they were going to fry him. The media had already convicted him, that his family would be harassed forever. But the main reason James told me that he finally decided just to plea was Foreman said, "Look, my health is not good, and I can't give you your best defense. So just take this plea and then hire another lawyer, set it aside, and you'll be much better off."